Hello photography fans, and welcome to another episode about classic cameras and classic photo gear. In today's segment, I want to introduce you to a camera that holds a special place in my heart. It's not necessarily a classic. It's considered one of the ugliest cameras ever produced. It's an 80s camera, so you can imagine how ugly that thing is. It's a Canon camera, which I consider ugly anyways. So, without further ado, let's take a look at this not so classic beauty. Ladies and gentlemen, here it is. This ugly camera, or as Gordon Ramsay would say, bloody dreadful, is a Canon T50 camera. It's pretty much worth nothing on today's market, and it's not a classic, although it's over 30 years, or near 30 years, so you could say it could be considered classic. So why do I care about this? Why do I have this camera when I have all these beauties you see in the back of me? Why this particular ugly thing? This camera was introduced in 1983. I was 2 years old. It was discontinued in 1989. I was 8 years old. My parents bought this camera, this particular camera, this one here that I'm holding in my hands, in 1987 or 1988. Supposedly it cost a fortune. I'm not sure how true that is, but they bought that and it came in a case. I still have the original case, and it came with a little flash. There you go. When I was a kid, probably 11, 12 years old, I was using this camera, because no cell phone cameras back then. I was using this particular camera on every school trip back in the old country. We will go to Warsaw, we will go to Krakow, we'll go to all these cities, and I will take this camera and take pictures with it. Back then I didn't realize what the buttons did and what that did. We had a local camera shop, and when I was done with the film, I would take the camera, they would open it up, develop the film, put new fresh film in there, and set the camera for me, and off I went and shot more pictures. Now, 20 some years later, I know how this camera works, and I know ins and outs of it. I haven't shot with this camera for at least 19, 20 years perhaps. Since I moved to the States, this camera was left behind in the good old country. So it was brought to me just a couple weeks ago by my 82-year-old grandmother, who happened to visit. And although I didn't care about getting it back, it's really cool because it brings out a lot of memories. As I said before, it's an ugly camera. It reminds me of 1986, I believe, movie was RoboCop, and it's just ugly. Just as bad as the movie was, although the movie wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great. So, without further nonsense, let's take a closer look at this not so classic beauty and let's get some details. Ladies and gentlemen, Canon T50. As I mentioned already, this camera was introduced in 1983 and it was discontinued in 1989. Let's take a look at this particular example. What is this camera? It's an automatic or semi-automatic, but not manual, maybe semi-manual camera. It doesn't give you much control of your exposure. All you basically do is point and shoot. But anyway, on top of this camera, from my left to the right, you see the film rewind, film. Then you see the hot shoe. Then you see a dial. Basically, you have one setting, program. That's all it is, program. And then you have this, which is self, which is basically self-timer. You have L for lock, and you have BC for battery check. Camera beeps. Here you have frame counter, and you have a shutter release. Huh. I like the sound, but not much else. In front of the camera, obviously you have a lens. And you have this rubberized grip, which is ugly. Kind of Robocop deal here. And you have your Panaprism with the Canon T50 in gold letters. And on the bottom, you have your battery hatch. Camera takes 2 AA batteries to power its electronics. You have the button to release the shutter to release the rewind mechanism to rewind the film, and you have a 1/4-20 tripod socket. Let's open this camera up and see if maybe there's some advanced electronics inside that we can see. You just pull the rewind lever up, the camera swings open. So basically you don't have any electronics whatsoever. So what's so special about it? You have the little orange dot, which is pretty cool, and you align your film starter, film lead to that dot, and the camera just pulls it in. That's really neat. You don't need to mess around with that. On the side of it, you have socket, and I'm not sure what that's for. I haven't done research on it. Forgive me. Now let's talk about shooting with this camera. There's not much to it anyway, but when the dial is in program mode, which is the only way you can shoot, and the lens is in green A, which is automatic aperture, the camera selects aperture and shutter speed, and that's basically it. It sets it up depending on the light it sees and the exposure it thinks it's going to need. So I can demonstrate. I'm pointing at the gray wall right now. So you'll see if I'm pointing at the gray wall right now, and I'm pressing the shutter. Okay, the film advances, automatic advance. You don't need a lever or anything. At least they have that. But when I cover the lens, there you go. It's about 2 seconds exposure. I believe that's max slowest speed you can get. There's no bulb setting. Now, if you switch the lens from automatic aperture to any other aperture by pressing the black button next to A, let's say I select f5.6, the camera automatically shoots at 1/60th of a second. But now I need to match my aperture and my 1/60th of a second to receive the correct exposure, so I still can't really say it's aperture priority. Now what's interesting, inside the camera, inside the viewfinder, there's 2 lights. If your camera is in fully automatic mode, there's a green P. In the right up in the upper right hand corner. If the camera is in manual by switching from A or manual aperture, the little letter that's displayed inside is an M for manual. Now, why do I care? Right. If you point a camera, let's start with program. If you point a camera at a subject that you want to take a picture of, and the green P that's displayed is solid, the camera is going to give you correct, quote-unquote, exposure. If that P is blinking rapidly, the camera has exceeded its capabilities and the shutter is locked and it will not take a picture. For example, super bright light, extremely bright, or extremely dark. Now, if that little P is blinking slowly, pulsing, so to say, the camera is telling you that your shutter speed are slow. So you need to use a tripod perhaps, or a moto pad, or just brace yourself real good so you don't get shaky, blurry exposure. And same thing goes for manual aperture. When I was a kid, I never shot a manual aperture. I didn't even know how to switch that. Now, since aperture is a combination of three things, aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, you do have a dial right below the advanced knob. Simply pressing that button, the silver button here, and turning the knob, turning the ring, you can select the ISO. I'm gonna have it selected at 100 ISO. I haven't shot with it in 20 years, but I will. So yeah, that's all it is about this T50 camera. It's pretty much worth nothing, maybe $10 on today's market, but to me it's memories. It did come with this flash, which reminds me of Nikon SB400, which is just, crap flash. But this one has two settings for ISO 400 and ISO 100, and basically it's an automatic flash. Great. Yeah, it is what it is. It worked back then. I barely used it, but a few times I was shooting in church or something, I used this flash. It was just amazing. When you're a kid, back there, you get these things, you just like, wow, look at this. So if I put it on, yay, you can see, this looks pro. And the flash shoots at whatever the camera tells it to shoot, I believe. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope I didn't bore you with this overview of this camera. It's definitely gonna have a spot on my shelf, right next to all these other beauties. This one, as I already mentioned, an ugly camera, holds a special place in my heart. Well, it doesn't, because my heart just there's no room in my heart. It wouldn't fit, but you know what I mean. So it holds a special place, and it's very well taken care of. And even though it hasn't been shot in so many years, it's still working fine. That makes me wonder one thing. Nowadays, there's this race to get the best, the newest, the best camera you can get, the longest lens, the best aperture, the best coating, the best ISO range, the best this, the best shutter speed, and the best frame per second, and all this stuff. But in the end, if this particular camera worked so well, and it took all these pictures, which are cherished now, if I look back at them, why can't it work just as well now? Unless the electronics inside erode and stuff gets rusted and messed up. Why can't it work now? Same thing with these cameras. If this camera worked so well in 1905 and 1906 or 07, why can't it work 100 years later if it was well taken care of? I tell you, it will still work just as well. Even better than it did in 1907, because the emulsions are much better now than they were 100 years ago. So the race for the best camera, for the fastest frame rate per second, is nothing. Because in the end, what matters is the picture that this camera took and the place it holds in one's heart, or in one's memory. Pictures taken with this, although they were taken exclusively on rolls of Kodak Gold 200, maybe 800, I don't know if there was 800. I still have some of them from my trips, and they just bring out great memories, even though they were taken with this nowadays considerably cheap, ugly looking camera. So why chase after the best? If something worked back then, it will still work now just as well. So ladies and gentlemen, until next time, keep shooting film and keep the film alive.